Ustedes ya le explicarán allá a la administración qué pasó. Okay, let's conclude this chapter about the age of revolution, guys. Okay, now yesterday we finished in this. This was the last slide we were discussing yesterday. Remember the previous one? Oh, Cristel Batista. Cristel Batista, she was aquí. Yeah, we were talking about the Constitution, and they said that they need to split the power in three branches. Now, these are the three branches: the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. And each one involves one segment in the government. Legislative branch, called Congress, they would make laws. That's the idea. They are supposed to make laws. Okay, but here in Panama, they do not make laws. Their concern is other thing. Now, the executive branch, headed by the president, would enforce the law, but sometimes the president doesn't enforce the law. And the last one is the judicial branch. Our court system would interpret the laws, but sometimes they take long time to give us their interpretation of the law. So it's not supposed to be as quick as it is, but they are too slow in order to interpret the law. So these are the three branches that began during those days because of this Mr. Montesquieu, who said that that it has to divide in three branches, the Constitution. Okay, now let's continue. Now this is the same thing. I'm not going to read it again, so you have it in the PowerPoint. I'm gonna load it up eventually here in your platform. Now let's go back to the old world, Europe, the French Revolution. Now, as America fought for and create a new nation, the French people paid close attention to those events. They were inspired by the Americans to fight for their own rights. Remember, 4th of July, 1776, and now I think the French Revolution is 1870 something. Over here is the date.
1789.
No,
I think.
no, 89, 1789, not 59, 89, that's it.
Creo que dije, profe, dije 89.
Was close enough, don't worry. Okay, now, on first society, it says the French king ruled over a society split in three groups called states. The clergy, and these are the clergy, is a member of the first state and enjoying many privileges, like the church. Nobles made up second society. They held important positions in military, government, and court. And the last one is where we are. We belong to this segment. Most French people belong to the third state. Included were peasant, craft workers, and shopkeepers. The third state paid the highest. Unbelievable. They had the highest taxes, but they had a few rights. But they have a few rights, and that wasn't fair. That's why it says unfair society. Now the government was heavily in debt because of the fight. Remember, they had some difference with the United the colony, the new colonies back in America. So they had a lot of deaths because of those battles. Now Louis XVI wanted to raise money by taxing the rich people. To do so, in 1789, he called together members of the three states. The third state member formed a separate group called the National Assembly. This group demanded that the king accept a constitution limiting his power. He said, no way, Jose. That's not to me, that's not for me. So Louis XVI refused to agree to such demand, angering many Parisians. Violence broke out on July 14, 1789. 89 is 76, 49, like 13, 14. years later than the Americans' independence. A mob stormed a Paris prison, the Bastille. Ahí en la Bastilla había muchos prisioneros de guerra y prisioneros políticos. Así que fueron a liberarlo. After forcing the guard to surrender, the mob used guns from the building to free the prisoners. The French Revolution had begun. 14 de julio, 1789. Now, this is a picture that shows how things happened during those days. This was La Pastilla, la toma de la Pastilla, the Bastille. Revolution and changes. After the Bastille fell, the revolution spread to the countryside, al interior del país. Peasants there were afraid that king and nobles would crush the revolution. In events called the Great Fear, peasants took revenge on the nobles' landlords for years of poor treatment. In their rage and fear, the peasants burned country, houses, and monasteries. They went crazy. Now, the Declaration of the Right of Man and of the Citizen. This document, it was a document guaranteeing some freedom for citizens and distributed the payment of taxes more fairly. Así que así iba a ser la división de los impuestos de manera más equitativa. Among the rights the Declaration's supporters were freedom of speech, libertad de expresión, of the press, and of religion, de religión. Let's move on now. Louis XVI was forced to accept the new laws, but new laws did not satisfy the revolution's leaders. So in 1782, they ended the monarchy and created a republic. The new year, the leaders put Louis XVI on trial and executed him. Facing unrest in 1783, the new French government began to under trial of any who requested its rules, who questioned it, its rules. In this period that followed, called the regime of terror, thousands of people were executed with the guillotine. Regime of terror began in France. Eventually, France created a democratic government. Enlightenment ideas about freedom were powerful. Once they took hold, they would not go away. Many Europeans and Americans enjoy freedom today thanks to Enlightenment ideas. The end, just for now, guys. Now let's watch a couple of videos that talks about French Revolution and North American Revolution. Well, where is it? Let's watch American. This is a why. Declaration of Independence.
Jay here, aka Thomas Jefferson. It's 1776, and we're at the Second Continental Congress in Philadelphia. It's June, and it's a hot one here. We're a bit more productive in the Second Continental Congress. First, we have all 13 colonies attending this time. In the First Continental Congress in 1774, only 12 colonies attended. It happened that our good friends in Georgia got cold feet and decided not to attend and risk upsetting King George. A bit wimpy if you ask me. One big thing we managed to achieve at the Second Continental Congress is that we created the first and only Continental Army. Quite an achievement given that our militias to date have been a hodgepodge of ordinary folk and farmers. And we elected George Washington to head up the Continental Army. Yeah, that's him over there. Great guy, a lot of fun at the tavern. He likes to be called the General. You might have heard we're ready to declare our independence from King George, so we thought it was time to put all this down on paper. So Congress appointed a 5-person committee to draft the Declaration of Independence. I was hoping Ben Franklin, that's him over there, would take up this assignment. Turns out that I have to write it, and I only have a couple of weeks. Yikes! So before I start drafting the Declaration of Independence, let's reflect a bit how we got here. More specifically, let's discuss King George's crazy taxation policies. George was big time in debt after the 7 Years' War. He figured that the colonists should pay him back for the British support in the French and Indian War. In 1765, the British Parliament passed the Stamp Act. No, not postal stamps, but it was a tax on everyday paper that we had to buy from Britain. Additional taxes via the Townshend Acts of 1767 were imposed on paint, glass, lead, and tea. George just loved shoving these taxes down our throats. We weren't going to take it for much longer. Needless to say, discontent spread throughout the colonies. So King George sent in the Redcoats in 1768 to force the colonists to pay up. Things got even more heated on a chilly morning in March 1770, when a group of Bostonians confronted the British soldiers by first calling them names like lobsters and bloody backs. Well, the Brits didn't take too kindly to those insults and opened fire on the Bostonians, killing 5 of them. Oh, by the way, John Adams, yeah, that's him again over there, defended the British soldiers in court. Typical Adams. The last straw was in 1773. King George threw the tea tax our way. Now, let me get this straight. He already taxed tea in 1767. Now he gave the tea monopoly in the colonies to one of his crony companies, the East India Company. So in December of 1773, a friendly group of Bostonians, many of them tea traders, threw a party of sorts. These guys, after a few drinks at the local tavern, dressed up as Indians, raided a few of the ships in the harbor, and managed to destroy over 300 crates of tea. Oh boy, that set King George off big time. King George closed the Boston Harbor, and that really infuriated all the colonies. What's amazing is that during all this, we colonists never had a say or any voting powers in the British Parliament. That's taxation without representation if I've ever seen it. Well, after the Boston Tea Party, things got worse between the colonists and the British soldiers. Stay tuned for more in our next video.
Yeah, over here I have some more guys.
All men are created equal, and they are endowed with the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Not so fast, Mr. Jefferson. These words from the Declaration of Independence and the facts behind them are well known. In June of 1776, a little more than a year after the war against England began with the shots fired at Lexington and Concord, the Continental Congress was meeting in Philadelphia to discuss American independence. After long debates, a resolution of independence was approved on July 2nd, 1776. America was free, and men like John Adams thought we would celebrate that date forever. But it was 2 days later that the gentlemen in Congress voted to adopt the Declaration of Independence, largely written by Thomas Jefferson, offering all the reasons why the country should be free. More than 235 years later, we celebrate that day as America's birthday. But there are some pieces of the story you may not know. First of all, Thomas Jefferson gets the credit for writing the Declaration, but 5 men had been given the job to come up with a document explaining why America should be independent. Robert Livingston, Roger Sherman, Benjamin Franklin, and John Adams were all named first. And it was Adams who suggested that the young and little-known Thomas Jefferson join them, because they needed a man from the influential Virginia delegation, and Adams thought Jefferson was a much better writer than he was. Second, though Jefferson never used footnotes or credited his sources, some of his memorable words and phrases were borrowed from other writers and slightly tweaked. Then Franklin and Adams offered a few suggestions, but the most important change came after the Declaration was turned over to the full Congress. For 2 days, a very unhappy Thomas Jefferson sat and fumed while his words were picked over. In the end, the Congress made a few minor word changes and one big deletion. In the long list of charges that Jefferson made against the King of England, the author of the Declaration had included the idea that George III was responsible for the slave trade and was preventing America from ending slavery. That was not only untrue, but Congress wanted no mention of slavery in the nation's founding document. The reference was cut out before the declaration was approved and sent to the printer. But it leaves open the hard question: how could the men who were about to sign a document celebrating liberty and equality accept a system in which some people owned others? It is a question that would eventually bring the nation to civil war, and one we can still ask today.
And the last one talks about the French Revolution, this one.
Hello friends, welcome to a new Happy Learning video. Today we're going to learn about the French Revolution. One of the most important events in world history, since it shifted the passage from the modern age to the contemporary age and performed the biggest political and social change that has ever been known in Europe. The French Revolution occurred at the end of the 18th century, exactly in the year 1789. At that time, King Louis XVI ruled. It was an absolute monarchy. That is, the king had all the power and could make the decisions that he wanted, without having to answer to anyone. Thanks to his power, Louis XVI and all the nobles who supported him had great wealth and great privileges. Meanwhile, the common people, the bourgeoisie, such as medical lawyers, artisans, merchants, or peasants, had to pay many taxes and lived, the vast majority, in misery. Fed up with this situation, the most disadvantaged social classes formed the National Assembly and decided to write a constitution where the rights and duties of all social classes were collected in a more just and egalitarian manner. From that moment on, violent riots began. On July 14, 1789, in Paris, the capital of France, a large mass of people went to Bastille, prison, where all those who had opposed the king were imprisoned, to free them. This assault became the symbol of the revolution. In the rest of the country, there were also many revolts and peasants rebelled violently against the nobles, looting and destroying their castles. The National Assembly took power and governed based on three great values: liberty, equality, and fraternity. The new governors wrote a very important document, the Declaration of the Rights of Man and of the Citizen, antecedent of the Constitution that was approved 2 years later. The French people dethroned King Louis XVI, and both he and Queen Marie Antoinette, his wife, were beheaded in the guillotine. The consequences of the French Revolution were many, but the most important thing was that it ended the inequality between social classes, that new rights were established for citizens, and that democratic ideas were spread to the rest of the countries of Europe. The truth is that knowing the past, the present is better understood, and the future is improved. Don't you think? Goodbye, friends. Until the next Happy Learning video.
Okay. See you guys. Okay, guys, now with this video, we conclude the chapter about the age of revolutions. Okay, now we are going to include this. This chapter is going to be part of the first test for your next trimester. Okay, guys? Do you have any questions? Julieta, do you have any question? Say yes, say yes. No, say no, no teacher. Say no teacher, say. I'm just kidding, Julieta, I'm just